Next, the battle in Dover over the DNREC Commissioner and a special performance by the legendary David Bromberg. This is the Delaware Way. Welcome to the Delaware Way. I'm Larry Menti. We are proud to introduce Greg Lavelle, who is the Senate Minority Whip. Thank you, sir, for coming in.
Happy to be here.
The Senate recently voted down some pay raises for top state officials. Why?
Well, it comes off of the Compensation Commission, Larry. So every 4 years, and this is in statute, so every 4 years after a governor's elected, there's Compensation Commission is put together. They're supposed to do salary surveys for judges, elected officials, cabinet positions, and things like that. And then they make a recommendation to modify those salaries. And the way it's set up is it goes into effect unless we reject it. So it's really strange in that it's an affirmative rejection, not a vote to accept it. And it was put in place under Governor DuPont, decades and decades ago. And at that point, it actually made sense because a lot of the times back then, legislators would not accept raises, and then you're doing a catch-up, and it seemed like a big number. I think the Compensation Commission has outgrown its usefulness because now we adjust those salaries, legislator salaries, judges, and others, as part of the normal budget process.
You kind of understand the reason for it. It takes the onus off of you of giving yourself a pay raise. That was probably the idea of it in the very beginning, right?
Yeah, and I agree with that at the beginning. Back in the 70s or the 80s, that may have made sense because what happened then is legislators wouldn't accept that pay raise that the rest of the state employee base was getting. And then so you'd have to do a catch-up. So instead of getting 2%, 1%, 2%, all of a sudden you're getting a 5% raise, and that was the hoo-ha when it would have been 5% anyway. I've tried, there's many ways to skin this cat. I have introduced and had legislation voted on numerous times to say it should just be a recommendation to the Joint Finance Committee, that we should vote on it, and now I will introduce, and I have introduced legislation that will essentially eliminate it. So if we need to adjust salaries, we should do that. The folks on the Compensation Commission spend a lot of time and effort. They're private citizens. We charge them with this responsibility. And then some of us, not all of us, some of us say, well, how dare they recommend a pay raise? But we've asked them to do that. So I think, and I've talked to the members, and this is round 3 or 4.
Is it false moral high ground? Is it set up so that people can take them? Is that what you're accusing people of?
And I think, we vote on everything. I mean, we don't do anything in Dover where we don't vote on it, except for this. Right? It's sort of turned on its head. And no one in this state that I know I have more respect for than Pete DuPont. But even Pete DuPont, I would guess, would say, just because something's been around for 25 years and it was my idea to begin with, doesn't mean that it should continue. Some things outlive their usefulness, some things need to be modified, and I think that's what the Compensation Commission is these days.
Let's move on to Sean Garvin, who is the governor's choice to head DNREC. You have a problem with him. Yeah,
so Sean Garvin was put forth by the governor in January along with the governor's entire new cabinet. I'm not sure how many, I think there's 15, 16 cabinet positions at the end of the day. And so I don't know if I have a problem with Sean Garvin, because I'm sure he's a nice father and a nice man and all that sort of stuff, but we did have questions for him, we the Republican caucus, and there was concerns, and we've heard from constituents as well. So we took the opportunity, the extra opportunity, to engage him and ask him some questions in sort of a closed-door meeting, just our caucus meeting. There's nothing secret about it. It's just an opportunity to have frank discussions and those types of things. And he didn't seem to know the answer to a lot of these questions, or he seemed evasive or just not willing to commit.
One of the problems in taping this show so far in advance is that there's news that happens in between when we tape it and when it airs. They're going to have a special election that's going to decide control of the Senate. The Democrat is Stephanie Hansen, who is running in a heavily Democratic district. If she were to win, she's an environmental lawyer. I asked her on this show if she would be a rubber stamp for the governor. She said she would not, just out of course, vote for Mr. Garvin. Do you believe that the governor has been holding off, waiting for that special election, thinking that he would then have the votes for him?
That's certainly one strategy to get your nominee confirmed. I would hope that what the governor would do, and they have not done to this point, is come back and talk to us. I mean, when you're trying to put something together and you have a discussion and we may not disagree the first time we meet, do you just end it? Or do you say, hey, let's get back together, Sean, could you call Senator Lavelle or Senator Hocker and have a discussion around some of these concerns that you have?
Sources of income are not sustainable. and that there's very few people that disagree with that. And because of that, he said all taxes are on the table. All increases of taxes would be on the table, and we need to have a discussion about it and look for it so we can depend on some income. I would imagine you disagree with that. Would you be able to hold a line against any tax increases in the state?
Well, I think, you know, the first rule of when you're in a hole is to stop digging, and we're in a $350 million budget deficit that continues to grow. And we can have discussions around revenue and things like that, but we have a legislature who continues to propose new programs. So we have this massive, it's 8% of our budget. That's big, right? And there's new initiatives and new spending proposals and new programs. Let's stop, because we're going to have to fund those. So even if something came together to fund the current situation, a year from now we're going to have the same problem.
But you would agree that unclaimed property and not franchise fees, but corporate fees are not dependable.
I don't agree with that. If you spend every dime you get, then you have a problem. And what's happened, and it's not Governor Carney's fault, this has happened over the last 25 years. I mean, when I first got to the legislature in 2000, the unclaimed property revenue source was about $120 million. Now it's $550 million. Under Governor Markell, every penny of that got put into the operating budget. What used to occur is there was a withhold of $40, $50, $60 million of that would then go into the bond bill, sort of one-time spending, and it provided that flexibility. So if it didn't come in next year, you just didn't do as much construction. But when every dime of the unclaimed property is put into the operating budget, then you got a problem. So we've created some of these problems. They didn't create themselves. But until we get a handle on our spending side and we actually make some reforms, you know, Medicaid continues to outstrip Delaware's budget. And when we've had these discussions, there's no savings to be had in Medicaid. Well, that's simply not true. And I'm not talking about putting people on the street or not providing for safety net and care. But if you have an expense line that continues to grow, I got an idea. Why are we expanding eligibility yet again? It's killing the state budget.
You're going to have a budget fight coming.
So you've noticed I haven't committed to anything other than saying we're going to talk about both of them and have that discussion.
Well, how do you feel about Donald Trump so far?
He's the president. You know, he won. He's allowed to do what he wants to do. He's quite
anything that concerns you?
He's quite a personality. It gets a little tiresome, but for people under President Obama, that got a little tiresome too. So we'll see. I mean, the proof is in the pudding. The president's been in office now for a couple of weeks. He's never going to be loved by the media. He's never going to love the media. I think what matters is the economy and jobs and that sort of thing. So we'll have to give him some time and let him get in. But yeah.
Thank you.
You got it. Thanks.
Greg Lavelle, Senate Minority Leader from the 4th Senate District in northern Newcastle County. Always appreciate you being here. When we come back, guess what? They're going to reinvigorate the polling at the University of Delaware. We have the new director next on the Delaware Way.